Hey, everyone. I hope you guys had a great Christmas. I know I did. So I hope you guys did as well. Yes, True Crime Buff here. I love it. I did change the title because I forgot to before I started. But I did change the title. So now we're on True Crime, you guys. Although I will be back later for all of the malarkey. I actually got an offer I couldn't refuse. I was supposed to go into work tonight and work night shift, but I was given a very good incentive to wait and come in for day shift tomorrow. So even though I loathe day shift, I couldn't resist the offer. So I will not be working tonight. I'll be working in the morning. Yay. That means I have to get up at 5:30. I'll probably still be awake. No, I'm going to try to go to sleep. But yeah, but as far as the malarkey, you're currently watching Dateline. My TV's always on Dateline 2020 something. Um, hey, Sheena. Hey, Angie. Hey, all y'all. Thanks for coming by for True Crime. I know that most of my audience loves the drama and, the back and forth stuff. But I love that you guys tune in even for True Crime. And again, the malarkey I will be back later for because there are some things I'd like to talk about. But we're going to dive in to True Crime. And this week, we're actually doing um, an unsolved case. So it is the unsolved case of Dorothy Jane Scott in Anaheim, California. This story, to me, it's still unsolved and it's quite disturbing because second and third also, and I'm going in at 6 a.m. Oh, my heart will be with you because I'll be right there with you. Watching the Texas killing fields. Oh, yeah, I've watched that one. That's a good one. Same there, Virginia. Yeah. You're scared of fake movies, but can go to bed watching. Yeah, I do. It's crazy. But this case for me, you like the switch up? Me too. It's nice for me too. Trust me. Um, awesome. Yeah, you can't go wrong with true crime. I'm definitely, I'm in it if it's true crime for sure. So Dorothy Jane Scott, this you've got to yes, you're message me Southern. So this story, I don't know why, but for me, this story is so disturbing because one, it's never been solved. And two, leading up to her disappearance, she had been getting phone calls by a certain man. The voice sounded familiar, but she wasn't quite sure. She couldn't exactly say who it was. She just knew it was familiar to her. So she had been receiving these calls from the stalker for weeks before disappearing from the UC Irvine Hospital on the night of May 28th. The calls continued after her disappearance. Now, this was what was even more disturbing for me. So after the disappearance, the calls were directed towards her family, which is even more disturbing because they would call and ask, like, are you related to Dorothy? And then they would say, I've got her. Even when the newspaper would put out things, they would call the newspaper. So that was, you did Lady Night. That's a good one. You work at 6 a.m. Also. Yes, Lesha, we got this. Yes, she couldn't pinpoint the voice, but she knew it was familiar. But there are things in this case that lead me to believe that it had to be someone that she knew just because of some of the things that happened. So we're actually going to take a look at this short video here just to explain a little bit about it. And then we'll talk about some of the theories and how this all went. I'll actually let you guys, I think it might be in this one too, because I've got some people did recordings of the voice or of the calls that she was getting, and they're disturbing for sure. Let's see if it's this one. Okay.
I'll catch up with you, bitch. When I
Oh,
get you
that's
home,
so eerie.
I'll catch up with you, bitch. So no one will ever find you.
That was the last call that 32-year-old Dorothy Jane Scott would receive from her stalker. Not long after, she went missing from UC Irvine Medical Center in the evening hours of May 28, 1980. And while taking Dorothy's life should have been the ultimate possession, it wasn't enough to whoever abducted her. Dorothy's stalker continued to call her family for the next 4 years, tormenting them and making healing next to impossible. Today's case highlights the serious nature of stalking, how it escalates, and how it often becomes violent. It's important to remember that anybody can be a victim of stalking. According to the CDC, around 1 in 6 women and 1 in 17 men will experience some sort of stalking in their lifetime. This is Dorothy's story. I'm Brooke. Thanks for tuning in to Armchair Investigator. In today's episode, we'll be discussing the stalking, abduction, and death of Dorothy Jane Scott. Dorothy had always been the kind of person who kept her head down and worked hard. At 32, she was a single mother trying to navigate life with her 4-year-old son, Sean. And taking care of her son really was her main priority. Dorothy was at a place in her life where she wasn't interested in going out. She wasn't a drinker and didn't use drugs. Family and friends said she was a devout Christian, and when she wasn't working, she was either at home or at church. Dorothy was lucky enough to have the full support of her family. She and her son lived with her aunt in Stanton, California, and her parents lived just 20 minutes away. Because Sean's father, a man named Dennis Terry, was living in Fairgrove, Missouri at the time, he wasn't a huge part of Sean's day-to-day life. Very little is known about Dorothy and Dennis's relationship. Dorothy didn't talk about it much. Their relationship was short-lived. She had been touring with an all-girls band for a while when she met Dennis and became pregnant. When she eventually moved back home, she put all her focus into her own life and being the best mother she could be. Her brother Jim said that Dorothy exemplified the word give, saying she'd just give and give and give, no matter what it cost her. Dorothy worked as a secretary for the Swingers Psych Shop and Custom John's Head Shop in Anaheim, a city about 5 miles from her home in Stanton. These were shops that had once been owned by Dorothy's father, until a man named John Kosila purchased them. At surface level, Dorothy's life was unassuming, mundane even. But beneath the surface lurked a stranger who had his sights set on her, and he was willing to go to any length to take control. In October of 1979, 7 months before Dorothy was abducted, she began receiving odd phone calls both while she was at work and at home. When she told her mother Vera about the calls, she said the voice sounded familiar, but she couldn't pinpoint it. The calls ranged from loving to threatening, with the caller making it clear that these weren't your average prank calls. He knew intimate details about Dorothy's life and seemed to have her schedule memorized. On some calls, he would profess his undying love for her. In others, he vowed to harm her. During one call, the man told Dorothy to go outside, saying that he had a present for her. When Dorothy finally gathered up the courage to look, she found a single dead rose placed on the hood of her car. It seemed like there was nothing she could do to get the calls to stop. Dorothy even moved 3 times between October of 1979 and May of 1980, and yet the calls continued. It was clear whoever was calling her had eyes on her. There were even days he would describe what she was wearing. Dorothy considered buying a handgun for protection, but worried about her son getting a hold of it. A week before her disappearance, she made the decision to start taking karate lessons in order to learn how to defend herself. The day Dorothy disappeared started off like any other day. Later that evening, around 9 o'clock, she attended an employee meeting and brought her son. It was during that meeting when she noticed that a coworker named Conrad Bostron didn't look well, and he appeared to have a large swollen bug bite on his arm. Concerned that the bite had become infected, Dorothy offered to drive Conrad to the hospital to have it checked out. Pam Head, another coworker, tagged along with them. While en route to UC Irvine Medical Center, Dorothy stopped at her parents' house to drop off her son, and changed the black scarf she was wearing to a warmer red one, per her mother's advice. While the 2 women waited for Conrad to be seen, they sat in the hospital waiting room, watching TV and flipping through magazines. Conrad was discharged at 11 p.m. and given a prescription for his bite. It turns out, Dorothy was right for urging him to have his arm looked at. Conrad had been bitten by a black widow spider. With Conrad officially discharged and still not feeling well, Dorothy went out to the parking lot to pull her white 1973 Toyota station wagon up to the front of the hospital, while Pam and Conrad filled his prescription. What Dorothy didn't know was that her decision to go alone would prove fatal. With Conrad's prescription filled, he and Pam walked outside to meet Dorothy, but she wasn't there. After waiting a few more minutes, they decided to walk the parking lot and look for her. That's when they saw Dorothy's car speed past them. Thinking that Dorothy didn't see them, Pam and Conrad waved their arms to get Dorothy's attention. But it was no use. The car bolted out of the parking lot, running a stop sign before barreling off down the road. Pam said, "We waved our hands. There was no way she could have missed us. The car made a right. We started running after it and it sped up." Pam and Conrad weren't sure what to make of it. Reports differ about the headlights on Dorothy's car. Some state that they were on. Some state that they were on and then turned off once the car left the parking lot. And some don't mention the headlights at all. Thinking that Dorothy would eventually come back for them, they waited another 2 hours. But she didn't show. They called Dorothy's parents to see if she had returned home. She hadn't. This wasn't like Dorothy at all. With the pit in her stomach, Pam called the police. She knew something wasn't right. And while police did come and check things out, they didn't feel like there was any evidence of foul play. A few hours later, around 4:30 in the morning, a concerned citizen called police to report smoke in an alleyway about 10 miles from the hospital in Santa Ana. When police arrived, they found Dorothy's car engulfed in flames. But Dorothy was nowhere to be found. It was evident that whoever left the vehicle did so in a hurry. The headlights were left on and the driver's side door was open. Inside, police found that an accelerant had been dumped on the passenger's side, and a gas can was located in the trunk. If police weren't taking Pam's call seriously before, they were now. After returning to the hospital parking lot to look around, they found a pack of Marlboro cigarettes, along with a box of tissues on the ground where Dorothy's car had been parked. Since Dorothy wasn't a smoker, they knew the cigarettes likely weren't hers. It doesn't sound like anything was ever done with the pack of cigarettes, nor were they ever tested for DNA. Because Dorothy had vanished from the hospital under mysterious circumstances, along with the fact that her car was found abandoned and set on fire, police wanted to keep the case close to their vests. They didn't want to release too many details to the public and compromise their investigation. And then, about a week after Dorothy's disappearance, her family received a phone call that stopped them dead in their tracks. The caller asked,
"Hello. Are you related to Dorothy Scott?"
And when Dorothy's mother replied yes, the caller said,
"I've got her."
Needless to say, the Scotts were shaken up. Did somebody have Dorothy? They weren't sure. After waiting an agonizing 2 weeks with no new updates from police, Dorothy's father, Jacob, took the story of what happened to his daughter to the local newspaper. He was sick of waiting around and hoped that getting word out about what happened to Dorothy would bring her home. On Thursday, June 12, 1980, the Santa Ana Register ran a story about Dorothy's disappearance and what happened to her car. A $2,500 reward was offered to anyone with information regarding what happened to Dorothy. Later that day, Pat Riley, the managing editor of the Santa Ana Register, received a chilling call. Not only was the caller insisting that he was the one who abducted Dorothy, but he claimed to have taken her life.
She was my love. I caught her cheating with another man. She denied having someone else.
And here's the thing. Pat felt the caller was the real deal, saying, "After a lot of years, you get a feeling about people." He did sound genuine. And the caller did know details about Dorothy's case that hadn't been released to the public. He knew that Dorothy had been at the hospital with a coworker who had been bitten by a spider. And perhaps the most chilling of all, he knew that Dorothy was wearing a red scarf, a detail very few people would have known. And then the caller said something interesting. He claimed that Dorothy had called him that night to tell him she was at UC Irvine Medical Center, but Dorothy didn't have a cell phone, as was the case with most in 1980. And Pam told investigators that the only time Dorothy left her side while they were at the hospital was when she used the restroom right before heading out to grab her car after Conrad was discharged. And while it's possible she could have called someone from work or her parents' house, nobody could remember seeing Dorothy make any calls. There are varying reports regarding what law enforcement thought about the call to Pat Riley. Some say that police felt the newspaper caller was a hoax, and they didn't think it was the same person who had been calling Dorothy and her parents because the callers' voices differed. Other reports stated that investigators believed that the caller was responsible for Dorothy's death, and he somehow knew details that hadn't been made public. Vera and Jacob didn't know how to break the news of what happened to Dorothy's son Sean, initially telling him that his mom was away taking care of a sick friend. Days turned into weeks, and Sean wanted answers, telling his grandmother, "Don't tell me no more stories. I want to know, even if it's bad." And as bad as it was, the caller wasn't done toying with Dorothy's family. Almost every Wednesday afternoon for the next 4 years, her family received calls from a man saying that he had their daughter. Police installed a recording device on the Scott's phone to try and figure out where these gruesome calls were coming from. But the caller never stayed on the line long enough to be traced, and he only seemed to want to talk to Dorothy's mother, Vera. When her father answered the phone, the caller would immediately hang up. Could this have been an indication that the caller was someone Jacob knew? Perhaps he was worried that Jacob would recognize his voice. Dorothy went missing in May of 1980, and for the next 4 years her family went without answers, never knowing if Dorothy was truly dead or alive. And then, in August of 1984, they received the closure they deeply deserved. On August 6th, a construction crew had been digging a trench for Pacific Bell telephone lines when they found the charred remains of a dog just off Santa Ana Canyon Road. And that wasn't all. They also found the partial remains of a human: a skull, pelvis, arm, and 2 thigh bones. Dental records would later confirm that they were Dorothy's. Her wristwatch and turquoise ring were also found nearby. Investigators were never able to make a connection between Dorothy and the dog that was found with her. It's possible the dog was used to cover the smell of human decay. Just like the dog, Dorothy's remains were slightly charred. Investigators believe this was due to a brush fire that had swept through the area in 1982. Due to the condition of Dorothy's remains, a cause of death was never able to be determined, but it's believed that she passed away soon after she was last seen alive. Her wristwatch had stopped at 12:30 a.m. on March 29, 1980. Shortly after Dorothy's remains were discovered, the anonymous calls started again, with the man on the other end asking,
Is Dorothy home?
Dorothy's parents would never find out what really happened to their daughter. They would never get their questions answered. Her father, Jacob, died in May of 1994, and her mother, Vera, died in 2002. And while there are a number of theories surrounding this case, to this day, nobody has been charged with her abduction and murder. Dorothy didn't appear to have any romantic relationships or scorned exes at the time of her disappearance. According to her family, she wasn't seeing anyone and she rarely went on dates. Each evening after work, Dorothy would drive to her parents' house to pick up Sean. After returning home, she'd cook dinner and the two would watch cartoons and read books together. A few days prior to Dorothy's disappearance, Sean's father, Dennis Terry, had been in town visiting his son. He and Dorothy had gotten into an argument over Dennis wanting custody of Sean. He felt that because Dorothy had had full custody of their son for the last 4 years, that it was only fair that he get custody for the next 4, an idea that Dorothy wasn't willing to entertain. Because of their recent argument, police were quick to question Dennis in regards to Dorothy's disappearance. Dennis claimed that at the time Dorothy was abducted, he was on a 2-day bus trip back home. He provided receipts for the trip, and several witnesses reported seeing him getting off the bus in Missouri. And the day of the kidnapping, he had spoken to Dorothy's parents via the telephone from Missouri. Dorothy's coworkers were questioned on a number of occasions, telling investigators that they didn't think this was the work of an obsessed customer, as Dorothy worked in the back office and hardly ever interacted with the shop patrons. Police also questioned a man named Mike Butler. You see, Mike worked in an auto body shop across the street from where Dorothy worked. Dorothy and Mike were friendly, but they never dated. However, it was widely known that Mike had a thing for Dorothy. He allegedly told police that he wanted to marry her. And because Mike worked across the street from Dorothy, he could have been familiar with her work schedule and probably even saw what she was wearing most days. Police never considered him a suspect or person of interest, nor did they investigate him further. Some have stated that Mike was unstable and involved in a cult. After serving in the United States Army, he became a news writer and was often published in Stars and Stripes, a newspaper outlet dedicated to providing independent news to the U.S. military. He worked odd jobs as a handyman, electrician, property manager, and locksmith. He passed away in 2014 from terminal health issues. His family stated that he was a deeply religious man who was known and trusted by many. And while he was known to have strong religious and political views and odd fringe ideas, many described him as just wanting to help others. Another name that popped up on the police's radar was John Kasaila, the owner of the 2 shops Dorothy worked at. He definitely would have been familiar with Dorothy's schedule, and he was one of the few people who knew that she was going to the hospital the night she disappeared. Years after Dorothy's death, in 1996, John was indicted on federal charges related to tax evasion and was accused of filing false returns in 1989 and 1990 that showed he had no taxable income. This news led to speculation that perhaps Dorothy discovered John's financial misconduct, leading John to silence his bookkeeper. He then created the whole stalker situation as a ploy to keep suspicion off of him. Again, these are just theories. Truthfully, I'm not sure what to think. No single person stands out in my mind as the culprit. What happened to her is just so unsettling. Her stalker was able to watch her, follow her, learn her schedule, all without raising suspicion. He had time to lay in wait. The night he abducted Dorothy from the hospital was a random, unplanned event. He couldn't have known she would end up going there. And what's even more, he couldn't have known she would walk out to her car all by herself. I just picture him driving behind her all the way to the hospital, parking his car in the same parking lot. It seemed like he was an opportunist, abducting Dorothy at the first chance that arose. But if he drove to the hospital, that means he left his car behind. Pam and Conrad weren't 100% sure it was Dorothy driving when she sped past them. But if it was, I imagine she was being held at knife or gunpoint. That means he left his car behind. I suppose he could have walked back to the hospital or gotten a ride, but you can see how my mind is spinning from all this. My heart breaks for her family and especially her son. During an interview with Paula Zahn, he said, "To grow up without a mom, to not know what it's like to experience life with a mom, it's not fair." I can't wait to hear from you guys on this one. Who do you think is responsible for taking Dorothy's life? If you appreciate today's video, give
Okay, so what do you guys think? Because I like that video because it was very short, simple, and to the point. Basically, she had been getting stalked for 7 months prior to her disappearance. The day and the stalker knew her schedule. He would talk about the outfits that she was wearing. He would talk about different things related to her day. He obviously had called her at one point and told her there was a present outside for her. When walking out, there was actually one dead rose sitting on her car. So he knew where she worked, lived, her schedule, everything about her life. It is really sad. He knew everything about her life. And then she goes to a meeting. Some people say she took her son, some people say she didn't. But the story that makes the most sense to me is that she took her son to this meeting at her job. Well, once she got to the meeting, one of her coworkers had something on his arm that he thought was, or somewhere on his body, he thought was a bug bite. She said, "No, that looks bad. I think you need to go to the hospital." So they get in her car, they go to her parents' house and drop her son off. She's wearing a black scarf. Her mother says, "It's cold outside. You need to change the scarf. Here, use this red one. It's, it's better. It's for more colder weather." So she switches the scarf at her parents' house. They then go to the medical hospital, and her and the woman that went with them sit in the waiting room waiting for their coworker to be seen. He was bit by a black widow spider, so they gave him a prescription. When he came out, Pam, which was the other girl, said, "I'll stay here with him and get the prescription. You go get the car." So she goes out to get the car by herself. After a little while, they had got the prescription and they expected to see her waiting at the front entrance of the hospital to pick them up. When they weren't, she wasn't there waiting, they decided they would walk to where the car was parked. As they're walking to where the car is parked, her car speeds by them with the lights on, and they couldn't see who was driving. They couldn't tell if it was her driving or not. The car speeds away, and she's never seen again. They did find her car burnt But there was, obviously, I think they were trying to get rid of the evidence. The first thing you thought of was, did he work with her? That was my thing. Did she work with, was it the owner? Did they work with her? Obviously, in my opinion, unless it was a stalker who was stalking her as far as like moving, like going from place to place and following her, it would have had to have been someone who worked with her that knew all of that stuff about her, in my opinion. Yeah, the guilt that Pam must have felt and the other coworker and letting her go by herself. I mean, and just like they said about the what was it?
When I
The
get you
scarf, the
alone,
car, all of that
I'll
stuff. Like
put you in
there's
a
just so
ditch,
much.
so no one will
And
ever
then the
find
calls.
you alone. I'll
Like
put
that's
you in
scary
a
as shit.
ditch, so no one will ever find you.
Yes, he took the first chance that he could get, and she was a religious woman. She was a single mom. She didn't drink. She didn't do drugs. Went to church, didn't even have a boyfriend at the time. Went to work, came home, and that was it. Those were her parents, um, who were very close to her. But in my opinion, I mean, how hard, like Kelsey said, how hard would it have been back then to investigate a case like this with no, you know, they had no cell phones, no way to track anything, no caller ID, nothing. Yes, you can. I'm not Wiz. You can definitely give me suggestions for sure. If you've got the text alert, you can text me. If you don't, you can send me a message on 2.0. Knew she wasn't very social, didn't do much, date, anything. So it just didn't make sense. And it, like they said, it did seem like he took her the first chance he got. She was by herself in this parking lot. Um, Justice or military department to know how to get rid of evidence and end calls in time. That was another thing. Yes, this was Anaheim, California. That was another thing they did. So this man literally called and tormented her parents for years and would talk to them about saying that he has her and things like that. They even put wiretaps on the phone and he would always hang up before it was, able to be traced. Exactly. It would go cold quick. I think he worked and lived or knew someone who lived by her. Yes, I had to stop saying anything in my name but mine. Oh no, I'm so sorry, Victor. That's awful. Yeah, and Kelsey, they did investigate to see if maybe she had some secret life, but there was just no way that she could have because of it. She was literally always at work or with her son because she was a single mom and the dad lived, he didn't live there. So, maybe someone from the church, maybe someone who knew her and hated her. Yeah, and her son, terrible. That was the last time when she dropped him off at the parents'. I think it was around 4 at the time. That would have been the last time he saw her. And, they took the car and burn it. And then years later, 4 years later, her remains were found in a field next to a burnt dog. Now, there was a forest fire that came through, or a fire that came through there in 1982. So that would have been 2 years before her remains were actually found. So maybe that's why they're thinking that's why they were charred. But they're also thinking that maybe they put the dog there to hide the smell of the decomposing body so that if anybody came over, they did investigate the baby's father, but he actually lived in Missouri. The baby's father lived in Missouri. So that's why I say, like, even though he had a dad and things like that, she was living the single mother life because he was in Missouri instead of California. Um, Maybe a police officer, I mean, there's some because they obviously had to know a little bit about, tracing calls and things like that because they would hang up every time before they were able to trace it. So it had to be someone, or at least with some type of knowledge. Hey, Mary, I hope you did too. Um, but the fact that this is just a cold case and, it was actually partial remains, it wasn't all of her remains that were found. This is one of the shops that she worked at. Now, she worked at 2 different places. The same guy, John, owned both of them. And as you heard in the video, he was investigated for tax fraud, things like that. She was his secretary slash bookkeeper. So some people are saying maybe she realized that he was doing some dirt, and maybe cooking the books or whatever, and maybe he did this to her to silence her to where none of that information would come out. I feel like that may, or the guy across the street that worked in the shop across the street. I feel like those two are probably, unless it was just some stranger that got obsessed with her and was, just following her from place to place. I feel like the guy who owned it, who she was doing the books for and all of that, who later came and was charged with things, that's a good one. And also the guy across the street, because he did like her and he did want to take her out and things like that. And she was not about that. She had no interest in dating him. But what's sad is the main suspects in this cold case, that man died in 2014. Her parents have both passed away. So they're likely thinking, because this has been, 44 years ago, that this case will probably never be solved. And it's terrible that her son will never get that closure. Someone very close to the family, right? A stranger you would think might show interest, right? And then they had to know the family, the mom and dad. They had to have known about her switching uh, they had to know about her switching the what the hell, the scarf. They had to know. That was the part of it that was very creepy for me, was that they weren't just stalking her on, just like calling and saying, "Hey, you look nice in that today," or whatever. But they had to know, they were obviously following her from the meeting or something, because they had to know that she switched the scarf. So I always was like, the two people that were with her obviously knew that. Her family knew that. And then obviously someone who was following her or something. I mean, they had to have seen her, before changing and after changing the scarf. So right before his helper carried it out. Yeah, you just never know. Sounds like the guy, yeah, that he was let down. That's who I really think it is, the guy across the street. Yeah, and I think the only reason that people thought about this was the other place she worked, which was called Swingers Psych and Head Shop. They sold like incense and psychedelic stuff and all that. But the same owner owned this Swingers Psych and Head Shop and owned the John's place. So it was both. Yeah, well, see, that's the guy, Laura, the guy that across the street, he passed away in 2014. So he's no longer alive. As far as John, the one that owned them, I can't remember if she said he passed away or not. The taunting of the parents is, yes, that is the part that is like, he was so sick and twisted, because they do think that she was, according to like the partial remains that they got, because it was not her full remains, they suggested that she was killed that night, that he did not keep her for years and then dump her, that they think that she was, everything happened that night. So, him calling and saying to her parents, "I have her and I've still got her," and things like that, that had to have tormented them, because at that point they did not have the remains. They had not found the remains. All they knew is that her car had been burnt and had no clue. So I'm sure those calls tormented them, thinking that she was still alive. I can't imagine that. Yeah, they definitely had to be watching Sandy. They had to have been following her or something. The killer is still alive. I bet this mental is driving himself crazy. Yeah, I mean, and it should, because he literally drove her parents crazy for 4 years until the remains were found. Mm. Oh goodness, Laura, that's terrible. And then UC Irvine Medical Center, and of course, back in the 1980, it's not like the technology that we have today, where you would think like, oh, well, can't they just pull the cameras from the parking lot and see everything? No, he did, Tilly. He had to have. There was something in there. Um, there was something in, maybe Scott Devine, maybe he was throwing them off, and saying, that he still had her. The whole changing the scarf is strange. Why do you suppose that was really, well, according to the family, the black scarf that she had on was more of a light weather scarf, and the red scarf was for more colder weather. It was thicker, and it was really cold. I guess it was cold that day, but it was in I don't know. It's confusing to me because I guess it was cold, but it was wasn't it in May? Because that's odd. Let's see. And then they offered a $2,500, um, reward for her also, and nothing came of it. In June, June 11th, 1980, they offered the $2,500 reward. Let's see, because that throws me off a little bit. If it was in May, sorry, I'm looking through these notes. Yeah, May 28th, 1980. So how cold would it have been in Anaheim, California? Yeah, they don't 98. Most of the time it's like stalking. It's almost like if they haven't done anything to you, there's nothing they can do, which is crazy to me. But that kind of is weird to me because if it's May 28th, how cold could it have been? I mean, I don't know because I've not been to Anaheim, California, but that was the story that was told that the black scarf was changed out for the red one because it was a warmer scarf. But that's odd to me. I'm glad you brought that up because I don't know how cold it would have been in May 28th, 1980. Although, they did I guess the meeting was over at like 8 or 9 in the evening or nighttime. So they were at the hospital. I think he got discharged at like 11 o'clock p.m. Yeah, he was finally discharged at 11 p.m. and it was discovered that he was bitten by a black widow spider. Good call on her part because she was the one who insisted that he be seen by the doctors. He was given a prescription and treated for the bite. Dorothy offered to bring her car, a white 1973 Toyota station wagon, to the front of the hospital so Conrad wouldn't have to walk the distance. He and Pam have the prescription filled while they wait for Dorothy to bring the car around. When the pair walked outside to meet Dorothy, she wasn't there. So they waited a few minutes, and when she didn't show up, they decided to walk to the parking lot. While walking to the parking lot, they see a car matching Dorothy's description speed past them. They waved to get the attention of who they believe to be Dorothy, but the car doesn't slow down. The car runs the stop sign at the exit and takes off down the road. Sources say they waited 2 hours for her to come back, but Pam doesn't return, or she does when Dorothy doesn't return. So they then waited 2 hours. I would have been like, which of course they don't have cell phones at the time. They don't have, I mean, it's not like it is today. It says after the car doesn't return, she says they called Dorothy's parents' house to see if she had went home. The employees of the two businesses were very familiar with Dorothy's father, Jacob. He used to own the head shop where they all worked and still did odd jobs as the business needed. Employees knew him well and would have known his phone number to call when he was needed. Pam had a bad feeling about the situation and decided to call the police and alert them of what happened. She said she couldn't tell if police took her serious or not, but they did come and check out the scene. There wasn't any evidence that alarmed them enough to consider the possibility of foul play. So, I mean, she literally was waiting for hours. I don't understand why they thought she just drove off. If the lady is going to insist he goes to the hospital and then waits hours while he's seen, why would she just drive off at the end? That makes no sense. Yeah, well, the hospital at that time in 1980, the hospital would fill the prescriptions. That way they didn't have to go to like a CVS or Walgreens. So the hospital actually had like a pharmacy inside the hospital where they could fill those prescriptions for them. So they filled the prescription at the at the same hospital that he saw that was in the emergency department. So it was like right there. How scared she would have been knowing she left them at the hospital. Right, that's what I'm saying. Like, there's no way, I don't think that she would have just drove off. I mean, no. Somebody took her for sure. I mean, if she had to be somewhere or had to go back home, she wouldn't have said it. She wouldn't have went with them and sat for hours, in my opinion. Also, some people started thinking that maybe Pam had something to do with it because, let's see. So in an interview, Pam said that she actually wasn't sure if it was Dorothy's car that they saw leaving the parking lot. She also said that the headlights were not on. But an interview with Paula Zahn, she once had said again that the headlights were on. In early newspapers, it was said that there was a car parked in front of Dorothy's car in the parking lot. So about 4 hours later, around 4:30 a.m., is when a resident called the police to report smoke in an alleyway. So her car was found engulfed in flames, no sign of Dorothy or anyone else. Uh, One of the cold case investigators said that it was evident that whoever left the vehicle there was in a hurry because the headlights were still on and the driver's side door was open. A canister was found in the trunk of Dorothy's car, and it was determined that that was the accelerant that had been put on the passenger side of the car. The outer front of the car was left pretty much intact, but the interior of the car was completely destroyed. Right, Scott Avon. Right. What did Zona say? Yeah, she didn't drive off. Someone else had her car and sped off so no one can see the driver. You think Pam? It might have been Pam. I feel like the way that, she switched her stories, Pam switched her stories and she was just after the fact just seemed odd to me. So that the weather that month and year was high 70s, low 40s. So maybe it was getting colder in the evening, so she switched it. Exactly, love. I can't believe they waited 2 hours. I don't know, Cindy. I appreciate that, Scott, because I was like, wait, I'm a little bit what? How sure that the two people waited for 2 hours? Well, that was the story they gave. Obviously, they didn't call police for a while. And here's the thing. He got discharged and the prescription at 11 p.m. and you're going to sit at the hospital for 2 more hours before you do anything? Before you call the parents or anything like that, you're just going to sit there for 2 hours? That's odd to me. We could find Tupac if we looked hard enough. Yeah, Pam, I feel like she knows something. Because that Tim, exactly. Hey, Nancy, that Tim's a little hot for me. Thinking of a story, yeah, because when I hear this story, I always think, what about the 2 people that were with her? Because they obviously knew about the scarf. They obviously knew about all of the things that this person would have to know. They worked with her. And then the story of now they don't know if it was even her car that sped past them. Now they don't know if the headlights were, or at least Pam doesn't know if the headlights were on or off. They waited 2 hours at 11 p.m. at night just to do anything. I don't know. I just seem like that. After you've seen the car, exactly. That's another thing, love. You see the car flying past you. It makes no sense to me. Hey, Kels, you can catch the replay. It rarely gets in the 40s here, even in the winter. Yeah, Julie. So that was odd to me. I was like, wait, what? It's in May and she needed a thicker scarf? That's odd. I feel like the story swap makes her look like, yes, it does. It does. Maybe the boss had them do it. Maybe they were all in on the cooking the books type thing. Maybe they were all in on that. I mean, the story is just, it gets wilder and wilder for me. And sadly, her and her son, see, that was the type of car that she would have had back then. I mean, maybe there was a lot of these cars, but for her to switch it up and say, well, I'm not even sure if it was her car or not. Those were her parents. They, tried to get, you can see Dorothy's picture there in front of them. They tried for years to get justice. They were tormented for years by this stalker who kept calling, saying that they had her. Well, see, here's the thing too, 98. So a black widow spider, he would have been sick. It gives GI issues. A lot of people think if you get bit by a black widow that you're going to pass away, but that's not true. It actually gives you very bad GI symptoms. So, but the reason they went to the hospital allegedly is because it looked like it was infected. So I'm wondering if he had these GI symptoms when it first happened and he thought maybe he was sick. And then days later, it started getting infected. And that's when she urged him to go to the hospital. Because, like you said, if it had just happened, he would have been deathly sick with GI issues. Yes, she was. Cindy, he actually lived in, you're welcome, Layla. He actually lived in Missouri. So he was in a different state. Daily high temperatures around 75, rarely falling below 66 or exceeding 86. Daily low temperatures increased by 4 from 56 to 60. So yeah, that's why I was saying, oh, thank you, Chrissy. So why he was at the meeting, right? 98. So I'm thinking maybe it was a few days later. Thanks so much. Right, let's solve it. The sad part is 1980. It's been 44 years. There's no really evidence. They burnt the car, so that was probably the crime scene. Was the car? I would allege. So the crime scene is gone. Her body was only partially found, and it was charred. The only way they could even identify her was dental records. Right, Sky. So the cooking of the books and the fact that the owner got in trouble later on was a lot of people's like, oh, there's a motive, because otherwise there was no motive, unless just them wanting to be with her and her not wanting to be with him. Wanting to be with the person. Maybe that was the motive. Um, her car was found, Layla, a couple hours after, but it was burnt. So, yeah, they preyed on her kindness. I think so too. It's terrible,
Are you
that her
related
parents.
to Dorothy Scott? I've got her.
Ugh. So that's the call that came after she was missing. Of obviously at that point they had found her car because it was discovered hours later, and the person called and said, "Are you related to her?" Of course, her mother said yes, and they said, "I've got her." We now know, at least by what they found at the scene, that they think that he did not have her at that point, that she had already been taken from the world. So, that's, I think the picture's in here. See, that was her car. If you can see, this is actually an evidence photo here. Let me take this away. This is actually an evidence photo. And if you can see, they say that the gas can was in the trunk, which is what they alleged was the accelerator. It looks like the accelerator was mostly put on the passenger seat, which in my opinion would have been where Dorothy was sitting. And I'm sure may have been where she was sitting when the crime occurred. So he poured most of the accelerator on the passenger side. And as you can see here, it burnt all of the inside, but the outside was still, intact. I'm sure it is. They probably don't even have the pack of cigarettes, to be honest, which is sad. Cameras everywhere. Yeah, it would have definitely helped had there been cameras, but I think there is an actual evidence photo in here. See, that's the inside. You can see it's completely charred and gone. The outside, of course, wasn't. But I feel like he focused on that passenger seat because that's where it would have happened. Oh, me too, honey. I would have given, but I think her parents were, because at that point, after she had, yeah, after the car was found burned and stuff, they still had not found her remains. So I feel like, and also they had the police wiretap their phone. So I think what they were doing, because he wouldn't talk to the dad, and that was something that alarmed me, because the dad was obviously part of the business, right? So you've got the dad who's part of the business. He used to own the psych or whatever, psychedelic shop, smoke shop, whatever it was. So they wouldn't speak to the dad. So I always wondered, why didn't they want to speak to the dad? I feel like they didn't want to speak to the dad because the dad would have been able to he would have known the voice. Because again, Dorothy said that she knew the voice, that the voice was familiar, but she could not put a name to the voice. She just knew she'd heard it before. So I feel like they avoided the dad because the dad would have known his voice. So they always wanted to talk to the mom. And when the dad would answer, they would hang up immediately. So the mom would talk and try to get them talking because they had tapped the phone and they were trying to get a location of, trace the call, but they would hang up right before the call would be traced. Yes, the dad would have recognized the voice. Exactly. Oh, I don't know if they're sensitive to temp or not. It goes way deep. Yes, it does. Hey, Deb. He would have known about the details about the spider bite for sure. And the scarf. That's the cigarettes that they found. And then, of course, they put the reward out for her. And then, okay, so the newspaper did the article about her and they put out the $2,500 reward. And they got this call, which they have said was not the same caller. They said the voices were different, but couldn't he have changed his voice? I'm not sure, but this is what they told the newspaper when the newspaper article came out.
She was my love. I caught her cheating with another man. She denied having someone else. I killed her.
So, and the guy at the newspaper said, after a lot of years, you tend to get a feel of someone. That was actually the dog that was found near her. That is actually the crime scene there. And then her watch. And what I found what crazy about the whole watch thing is they said that her watch had stopped in March of 1980, but I guess she was still wearing it. They don't know because I think it was partial remains and they were charred, Kelsey, so that I don't think they were even able to tell about that. Yes, I would have looked at people around that smoked Marlboro Lights, right? Or was the Marlboro Light pack from somewhere else? Was it from someone else that dropped it? We'll never know because they didn't test it. The dad would have known. Sky, that's a good thing. Like, why wouldn't they have just like held the phone up where they both could have heard it? I don't know. I'm not sure. Well, no, that wasn't the little boy. It was her coworker, Victor, who had the Black Widow bite. But that's what I'm saying. So the spider bite was becoming infected. So it wouldn't have just happened. It would have happened like a few days prior because a Black Widow will make you extremely sick. You'll vomit. You may have diarrhea. You're going to have major GI issues. So I'm wondering because it was starting to get infected, it had to have been days prior. I don't know, Sandy. Again, like we were talking about, the guy that owned the place, he ended up getting charged later for like taxes, stuff to do with his taxes and his books with the shop. And obviously, she is the one who did the books. She was his secretary. She handled all of that stuff. So people were wondering if maybe that was a motive that she found out about it. She confronted him, and then he did this to cover up what he had done. And then only later, years later, he got charged for the crime. So they're thinking maybe she found it out. There's so much. But I do think there's a picture in here. That was the brush fire. Okay, here. So if you look here, okay, this is the hospital was in the center. Okay. The crime scene where she was dropped, where it says crime scene, that is where they found her remains. Her car was found in the spot at the bottom. So you can see that the hospital, where they found her car and where her body was found, they were all in very close distance to each other. They were not that far from each other. Hey, Lita. Yes, we're talking about you'll have to watch the replay, but we're talking about the disappearance and murder of Dorothy Jane Scott. It is still unsolved to this day. It happened in 1980. Her body was found in 1984, and there still has been, nobody's ever been charged with what happened to her. So there you can see how it went in the map. So the hospital seems to be the center of this. And then it looks like they drove south, dropped her car. I mean, was there more than one person involved? Did they go from the hospital to the crime scene, dump her, and then go past the hospital with her car and then burn it? Or were there two people involved and they went from the hospital, dropped her car, burnt it, and then took stuff to the crime scene? I think it's odd that the hospital is in between the two instead of like hospital car crime scene or hospital crime scene car. Like I felt like it was odd that the hospital was in the middle of both of these versus a straight line. There is a lot. It was just a field. They were actually out there. It was just a field, and they were out there doing I think they were out there doing let's see, like power lines and stuff. There was nothing out there. The people were out there. Let's see. I have it in my notes. Okay, so August 6, 1984, a foreman of a construction company who was preparing to dig a trench for Pacific Bell telephone line found the charred remains of a dog off Santa Ana Canyon Road. Upon further investigation, human remains were also found. The foreman told a newspaper that he had joked just minutes prior with the backhoe operator about watching out for dead bodies. I want to note that these were partial remains and the complete skeleton was never discovered. There was a human skull that was found, and dental records confirmed that these were the remains of Dorothy Jane Scott. A turquoise ring and a small wristwatch were also found near the body. Dorothy's mother, Vera, identified them as belonging to the daughter. Investigators are unsure of what the connection is between the dog and Dorothy or how long the dog had been there. Theories circle that the dog could have belonged to the killer who decided to bury the dog there with Dorothy when it passed, which does hold weight. I doubt the dog was next to Dorothy by pure accident. Anthony Sherlock actually does not believe that the place Dorothy was found is where she was left. I think Anthony was an investigator on the case. So he does not believe that Dorothy was found where she was left. The remains were found near a hilly area, so it is definitely possible that Dorothy was left higher up and that rain and erosion caused the bones to move over time. This could also explain why there was a dog found with her. Dorothy's remains were slightly charred due to a brush fire that had swept through the area in 1982. This factor, along with how long the body had been in the woods, made it impossible to determine what her cause of death was. In an eerie twist, Vera said that Dorothy's watch had stopped at 12:30 a.m. on March 29, 1980, just an hour after she was seen alive. I think May 29th, my bad. I think they misprinted that wrong. Vera said that Dorothy's watch had stopped at 12:30 a.m. on May 29th, 1980, just an hour after she was seen alive. This can't be a coincidence. My gut reaction to this information was that the killer stopped her watch when she died. I'm sure many people believe this theory. Though relieved to have finally found their daughter, the Scotts were not granted reprieve for long. Shortly after the discovery of Dorothy's remains, they began receiving calls again. The caller would ask, "Is Dorothy home?" before ending one of his calls. I'm not sure how long the calls continued. Unfortunately, Dorothy's parents would not get any answers about what happened to their daughter. Jacob, the dad, died on May 24th, 1994, and Vera died 8 years later in 2002. Dorothy's son Sean grew up in a good of circumstance as one could hope, given his childhood. He's still searching for justice for his mother. He said that what happened to his mom completely destroyed his grandmother Vera and ruined the rest of their life. She was never the same. Ugh, that's terrible. Heavy. Yeah, it is heavy for sure on the body. That was, see, in there it says May, but they've reported that it was actually March. But so her watch had stopped. So he got discharged at 11. At 12:30 a.m. on May 29th, which would have been the next day, her watch stopped. So they think that the killer actually is the one who stopped her watch. That is creepy as hell.
Dorothy home?
That's really creepy to me. No, they think that the killer stopped her watch somehow at that time, because that would have been the time that she would have basically passed, is what they're thinking. But that was the call that he did after her remains were found, asking if she was home. But yeah, it stopped.
Home?
So she was abducted. Oh, that's so eerie. She was abducted on May 28th after 11 p.m. On May 29th at 12:30 a.m., her watch stopped. So it's terrible. And that's her parents at the funeral. This is the guy, John, right here, that they had suspected. And if you look here, Custom John's owner faces tax charges. Now, this was years later. She was abducted. She went missing on May 28th, 1980. June 12th, 1996, which would have been 16 years later, John was he was the owner of the Anaheim business, and he was indicted on tax evasion charges. John, 48, owner of Custom John's General Store, which was where she worked, was accused of filing returns for 2 years that falsely showed he had no taxable income. So it said for 2 years, but who says that he wasn't cooking the books for years? The indictment in Los Angeles charges material taxable income in 1989 and 90 that he failed to report. So even though these charges would have been after she disappeared, they felt like maybe he was doing some shady shit. And she was a religious woman. She was straight laced. Maybe she found something that he was doing and was going to turn him in. And maybe that was the motive. But again, this case is still not solved. And it may never be. It may never be solved, which is the sad part. You know, it's sad because her son still is looking for justice. And I hope that one day, even though her parents are gone, that somebody is, or at least even if the person or the people who are responsible for this, at least knowing what happened and getting that closure, I pray that that happens for her son and for her extended family. It rewinds itself. Well, that's even more strange. Pam seems suspect to me. Like I said, I wonder if yeah, the whole Pam thing, changing her story and all of that seems very suspect to me. And again, Pam and this guy that went to the hospital, they would have definitely known all of this stuff. Audrey Heron, Connie, it's never been solved. Her car has never been found. Oh, wow. Mob ties, Layla. That's wild. But I hope you guys enjoyed this true crime unsolved case. And I will be back on Tuesday for another true crime story. If you have any stories that you would like me to cover, please message me either through the text app or you can message me on 2.0 and I would love to cover it. A girl in my community is missing. She's 14. Her name is Emma from New York. Send me that information, Marcy, and I will be glad to share that for you guys. Sky, are you tripping on what? Yeah, so that's what I'm saying. Like the whole watch thing, and that it stopped at 12:30 a.m., which would have been when all this was happening. Story on a M. I don't know what that is. Send me a message, Maury. But I hope you guys enjoyed it. OMW, I have to look. I didn't know you sent me any. Oh, she was a nurse leaving work. Oh, I would love that. I would love to cover that for sure. But I hope you guys enjoyed this true crime story, and I will have another one next week. Thank you guys so much. And I'm sure this story, along with the one we did last week, will keep you up at night because they keep me up at night for sure. So I love you guys, and that's not my intention, but true crime is sad, unfortunately. But hopefully, this case, like many other cold cases, will be solved. And hopefully one day I'll be able to come on here and tell you what has happened and that it has been solved. I would love to be able to do that. Yeah, Smith, he definitely had been, and it finally caught up to him. A watch you can stop, you can wind it forward or backwards. It stops when it's broken. So maybe he broke it. The fact that it was laying next to her is odd to me too, because if she had moved, how did the watch and ring move with her? There's so much to it for sure. Oh, Maury, yes, I would love to do that. Yes, definitely rewatch the replay. If you're watching the replay, #replay. Thank you guys so much. And I will see you soon with the malarkey. I'll be on in about an hour and a half, 2 hours. I'll send you a text. So if you're not signed up for the text alert, definitely sign up. Text at FF Outlaws to 81010. That way you always know where I'm at, whether it's true crime, malarkey, or anything else, you'll know. Thank you guys so much. Bye.